Keita Sumino starts his morning completely trapped and stuck in bed because his twin stepsisters, Ako and Riko, have literally fallen asleep on either side of him and turned both his arms into personal pillows like his body is just shared property. Ako wakes up first and casually apologizes for hitting him, then immediately plants a teasing kiss on his cheek like it's normal morning routine, brushing off his protests before heading out like nothing happened. Riko was faking sleep the whole time, so the second they're alone, she wastes no time doing the same, even offering to help him get dressed since she basically left his arms useless from being pinned all night. At breakfast, Ako brings up the kiss in front of their mother without a hint of hesitation, and instead of shutting it down, both parents fully lean into the situation, with their father casually reminding everyone they aren't blood-related and acting like Keita should just relax and enjoy the chaos instead of thinking too hard. Keita, trying to escape the madness, changes the subject and says he wants to earn his school placement through sports on his own terms. At school, his friends casually reveal they chose the same school, purely because of the sisters, which annoys him more than he wants to admit. And by evening, both girls are openly competing for his attention at home, pushing him until he retreats to his room and concludes it's not romance at all, just a messy competition he never signed up for. Feeling guilty for upsetting him, Ako decides to make a lunchbox to win back his attention. Riko appears shortly after and insists on helping. The two end up fighting over his belongings in the kitchen and wake Keita up before their parents walk in on the chaos. The next day at school, Ako delivers her handmade lunch while Riko counters with one from a convenience store and openly admits she just cannot let Ako get ahead. When they both confess their feelings in front of his classmates, Keita snaps and tells them to leave. He immediately regrets it and chases after them to apologize. They reconcile on the condition that he is allowed to focus on studying, and both sisters celebrate by jumping on him simultaneously and knocking him flat. They then promptly start fighting again while he lies on the ground smiling at the ceiling. Keita wakes up to find Ako kissing him on the lips and tries to shut it down immediately, but Ako brushes it off as something perfectly normal between siblings. Keita reminds her they share no blood, and that whatever she just did was not the innocent good morning kiss she is describing, especially given that her tongue was involved. Before the argument can go much further, Ako pulls back his blanket and discovers Riko has been sleeping right next to him the whole time. That sets off a fresh round of tension before Riko calmly leans in and kisses him too. Later that morning, their mother casually brings up neighborhood gossip and reveals that word has already spread about both sisters confessing their feelings for Keita. She asks him directly which one he is going to choose. Their father backs her up by reiterating the no-blood relation point, and their mother mentions she has already made a bet with the neighbors over the outcome. Keita walks out of the house without another word. He arrives at school exhausted and unable to focus. When he gets home, he finds Ako and Riko already waiting inside his room, having reasoned that if they were already there when he arrived, he would be less likely to kick them out. Their logic checks out, and he agrees to let them stay as long as they keep quiet. Things unravel quickly when Riko removes her shirt and suggests they stop wasting time, which earns her a scolding from Ako. The two of them then start going back and forth while Keita tries to tune it out. Ako notices Keita's hand is bandaged and asks what happened. Riko responds by pressing his hand gently to her forehead and claiming she is sending healing energy through it. Ako immediately swoops in to counter with what she calls liquid love, and in the chaos that follows, Keita ends up on the floor. That night, he sits in the bath and realizes with genuine unease that their kisses have started to feel different to him. Somewhere along the way, he stopped processing them as something a sibling does and started processing them as something a girl does. He cuts the thought off and rushes to finish, but Ako and Riko walk in before he can get out, and the night ends in a tangle of awkward circumstances. He cannot fully piece together the next morning. The moment Keita's end of trimester ceremony wraps up, Ako and Riko are waiting for him outside in handmade Santa costume. They had booked a karaoke reservation specifically to pull him out of the low mood that has been dragging him down lately. Keita admits he has been feeling like he is already falling behind on his entrance exam preparation. Ako tells him that giving up mentally before even starting is the real problem. Her idea is simple. If sadness is contagious, then so is happiness, and karaoke is the prescription. Once they settle in with drinks and food, things take an unexpected turn when the oolong tea turns out to have been accidentally mixed with alcohol. Riko is the first to go down and falls asleep on the couch within minutes. Keita and Ako quickly figure out what happened. With Riko out and the two of them alone, Ako sits close to Keita and frames the situation as an accident they might as well lean into since the tea is already in their system. Things get complicated fast when Ako realizes the alcohol has made her legs too heavy to walk to the bathroom. Rather than accepting Keita's hand, she ends up crawling across the room. Just as she leaves, Riko wakes up with the same problem and makes it clear she has no intention of making the walk herself. Keita pushes her toward the bathroom, and what follows is a series of increasingly awkward moments where he ends up helping Riko in ways he is deeply uncomfortable with. That includes removing her underwear at her insistence while she reminds him that as kids, she and Akko used to take care of him when he wet the bed, so he owes her at least this much. Akko returns from the bathroom to find Keita coming out of the stall and immediately jumps to conclusion. Riko refuses to correct her version of events and leaves Keita completely on his own to deal with the fallout. Later, once Keita has had enough to drink to stop overthinking everything, he and Akko end up alone together, and she kisses him while he is in no state to put up much of a protest. The karaoke room phone cuts things short just in time. The night ends with the three of them walking home while Keita thanks them both for cheering him up, completely unaware of everything he slept through. That frustrates Akko deeply even as she tries not to show it. On a national holiday, Keita has already left the house to sit a practice exam. Akko and Riko share a quiet moment of admiration for how seriously he is taking his entrance preparation, before the conversation shifts to how difficult things have become for them personally. Their shared agreement to stop distracting him and focus on their own charm instead has left both of them feeling disconnected and low on energy. Keita tends to be the source of whatever motivation and liveliness they carry around on a daily basis. Akko confesses she has not had any real closeness with him in a while, and the fact that they can no longer freely walk into his room only makes it feel more pronounced. Curiosity eventually wins out and both sisters head into his room anyway. They find it messier than expected and stacked with study materials that confirm he is in the middle of a serious final push. While Akko starts cleaning up, Riko digs around the room and eventually pulls a magazine out of his school bag. One look at the cover and both sisters go still. It is an adult magazine built around the fantasy of a man being intimate with his sister, complete with a threesome scenario. Meanwhile, at school, Keita's friend is already aware of the magazine and gives him a teasing rundown of its content that prompts Keita to suddenly remember he forgot to hide it before leaving the house. He reassures himself that his sisters no longer go into his room, which would have been true until that morning. Back home, Akko sits holding the magazine and turning over questions she cannot quite dismiss. She wonders whether Keita actually thinks about her and Riko in that way. When Riko walks back in and finds her with it, the teasing starts immediately, but it does not stay lighthearted for long. Riko raises the straightforward point that Keita buying that specific magazine means something, and when Akko struggles to respond, Riko takes it a step further and suggests they start practicing. What follows is a session with a stand-in dummy in Keita's room that begins as a rehearsal and ends with both sisters more shaken than they expected. Akko insists it was purely practice, and Riko agrees while making it clear the real version will involve Keita. When Keita arrives home, Akko panics and tries to cover up the evidence, but the magazine slips from behind her back and lands on the floor in front of him. That night, the parents return to find Akko and Riko fighting loudly over the whole incident. Their father makes a poorly timed joke, and Keita sits alone in his room, holding the magazine and quietly wondering what went through his sisters' minds when they found it. Keita heads out on a trip to Ikaho Onsen with Akko and Riko, and is grateful to their mother for the free tickets that made the whole thing possible. When he asks the taxi driver to recommend something worth seeing nearby, the driver drops all three of them in front of a secret treasure museum and drives off before anyone can object. Riko immediately drags them inside, where the place turns out to be packed with erotic historical artifacts. Keita is left caught somewhere between embarrassed and genuinely curious, while Akko freezes up in front of a set of extreme woodblock prints and starts blushing the moment Keita accidentally brushes her hand. Riko makes the atmosphere worse by pulling up her shirt and asking Keita point blank whether the real thing excites him more than the displays. That sends Akko straight into damage control mode and sets off another fight between the two sisters. On the taxi ride back, the same driver greets them cheerfully and asks if the special spot got them all fired up, which earns him a loud earful from Keita and Akko, while Riko gives the place a glowing review. That evening, Riko suggests the three of them take advantage of the hotel's private open-air onsen together. After some hesitation, Keita agrees and reasons that since it is already reserved they might as well use it. Once inside, what starts as an unexpectedly comfortable moment in the warm water quickly turns complicated when Akko secretly spikes Keita's drink with alcohol. Riko unknowingly drinks from his glass and goes completely limp. She begins sinking into the bath, while Keita, now drunk himself, tries to hold her up. Aiko's carefully laid plan falls apart when Keita loses consciousness and goes under before anything else can happen. He wakes up in the middle of the night to find Aiko asleep across his leg. When Riko stirs as well, she asks him for a kiss, which he eventually gives in to. The moment settles into something unexpectedly tender, and Riko holds him the way she and Aiko used to when they were all children, and Keita would cry after losing his birth mother. By morning, Keita remembers nothing and only knows from the vague feeling in his body that he probably did something embarrassing while both sisters look at each other and sigh. On a cold spring morning, Keita and the sisters linger at the heated table before reality kicks in, and he reminds them they will be late for school. While their parents head out after a quiet kiss goodbye, Riko catches the moment by accident and is visibly thrown off by it. Aiko responds by telling her to stop overthinking and finish breakfast. The unsettled feeling follows Aiko into the parents' room when she goes to clean, where she notices a suspicious amount of tissues in the bin and ends up spiraling into thoughts about what might have gone on the night before. Riko appears behind her mid-spiral and jokes that a new sibling might be on the way. Aiko dismisses it by pointing out their father used protection, but Riko calmly reminds her that no method is completely reliable. Keita walks in on the tail end of this conversation, and by the time they get to school, all three of them have been dragged into the same uncomfortable discussion before collectively agreeing to shake it off. That night, Keita retreats to the living room to study in the warmth and finds the sisters already there. The evening takes a sharp turn when unmistakable sounds start coming from the parents' room and leave all three of them rigid and pretending not to hear anything. Keita tries turning on the radio to drown it out, and the radio host begins talking about the exact same problem in real time, which pushes Aiko over the edge. Their father's phone rings from his coat in the living room, and when they hear him coming, they all dive under the heated table together. The cramped warmth creates its own kind of tension before he leaves, and they finally scatter to their room. Unable to sleep, Aiko shows up at Keita's door under the pretense of bringing a midnight snack, and he sees through it immediately. He accuses her of being wound up from the sounds earlier, and she calls his bluff by pointing out he is in the same state. The argument ends with her pushing him onto the bed and both of them giving in. Riko walks in before long and demands equal treatment, so Keita wraps a cloth around her eyes to spare her the embarrassment of being watched. The night ends with all three of them tangled up together in something none of them are willing to name in the morning. The next day, Keita drags himself to school, looking exhausted, while Riko stares at the marks on her neck in the mirror and very nearly refuses to leave the house. Aiko has not eaten in 2 days heading into the school's physical exam day, and is running purely on determination and the memory of losing to Riko every single year since middle school. This year, she has decided she is taking back her honor, and the stakes between the two sisters are simple. Whoever loses the weight comparison skips dinner. Outside, Keita's friends are already in position with cameras and completely fixated on getting footage of Aiko and Riko and their bloomers. Keita catches them in the act and chases them through the school in an attempt to confiscate the equipment. While rounding a corner at full speed, he runs straight into a quiet girl named Mikuni and sends her coffee flying everywhere. He apologizes immediately and offers to pay, but she waves it off while visibly flustered by the encounter. Inside the girls' changing area, Aiko and Riko are gearing up for the competition, when a younger girl named Mikazuki shows up and draws immediate suspicion from Riko, who assumes she is there to get close to Keita. Mikazuki explains she is just delivering something to her older sister, Kiryu, who is helping run the exams, and that closes the argument before it can start. The fitness tests go entirely in Riko's favor, as Aiko struggles to keep pace, and Mikazuki watches the whole thing with open amusement. Mikuni eventually wanders into the gym, looking flustered and worried. She has missed her turn, and Kiryu fits her in with the second-year group. The chest measurement section draws uncomfortable comparisons among the girls when Mikuni's size turns out to be larger than Kiryu's and leaves Aiko and Riko quietly rattled. The weight measurement arrives and Riko wins again, which sends Aiko into a desperate spiral of removing clothing piece by piece on the scale to shave off grams. She ultimately strips down entirely in front of everyone, while Mikazuki praises her resolve, and the rest of the girls stare in disbelief. When the scale finally gives her a winning number, Kiryu calmly explains that she has to add the weight of the removed clothes back in. Riko wins by the official count and Aiko bursts into tears. At that exact moment, Keita's friends force a way into the gym, and he stumbles in right behind them still holding a camera. Aiko and Riko take one look at him, and both come down on him without a word of explanation. On a rainy afternoon after school, Keita spots Mikazuki standing outside without an umbrella. She had stopped to buy something for her sister before the weather turned. She immediately frames the whole situation as a classic fate encounter and convinces Keita to walk her home under his umbrella, while casually hinting that if he plays the moment right, he might end up inside their house too. A passing truck settles the matter by soaking him completely, and the invitation becomes impossible to refuse. Inside, Mikazuki hands him her sister's clothes to change into while his dry out, and estimates they have about 2 hours to fill. The time does not pass quietly. She shows up holding a milk bottle and runs out of ways to explain herself without making the conversation explicitly suggestive. The back and forth escalates until Keita taps her on the head and tells her to slow down. She shifts into a softer tone and admits that being alone with him in her room has genuinely been a dream of hers before the whole thing circles back around to innuendo again. When Keita accidentally spills juice on her skirt, she uses the moment to push things further, and he eventually calls her bluff by flipping her onto the bed and taking back control of the situation. He only gets as far as noticing her teddy bear patterned underwear before bursting out laughing, and the tension breaks entirely. The timing works out because Kiryu arrives home shortly after and walks into the room without knocking. She quickly lectures Mikazuki about the dangers of trusting boys home. Mikazuki fires back by suggesting Kiryu might have her own unspoken feelings for Keita, and a flustered Kiryu storms out. That gives Keita just enough time to emerge from hiding soaked in sweat. He makes it home to find Ako and Riko dressed up and waiting in a homemade Hawaiian resort setup, while Kiryu stands in her own room quietly, concluding that the situation with Keita has grown beyond just two sisters. Keita answers the door to find Kiryu standing there for a home visit. She has arrived early, while he is the only one home since his parents mentioned working overtime, and Ako and Riko are tied up at a joint school committee meeting. Kiryu makes it clear she is there to address his behavior, and when he leads her to his room, she begins moving through it methodically. She goes through drawers and checks clothes and works through a mental checklist. What she finds, adult magazines with themes covering both sisters and younger girls, confirms every suspicion she walked in with. When Keita returns to find her mid-investigation, he tries to make the case that what she found is perfectly normal for a teenage boy, which she refuses to accept. The conversation shifts when she realizes he must have overheard everything she and Mikazuki talked about during the physical exam. Before she can properly gather her thoughts, Keita steps forward and loses his footing, which sends the juice glasses straight onto her. She ends up showering at his place with no one else around and quietly questions every decision that led her to this moment. Keita looks for something for her to wear and gets distracted by his own imagination. He barely manages to deflect Ako's phone call without letting anything slip. When Kiryu comes out of the bathroom and cannot find clothes, she wraps herself in a towel and walks to his room, where the towel slips and she ends up on top of him. The conversation that follows is surprisingly honest. Keita insists he has never viewed his sisters that way, and Kiryu struggles to maintain the professional distance she came in with. His parents arrive home at exactly the wrong moment, and while his father makes a joke about private lessons that sends Kiryu into a full internal crisis, she eventually walks away with her dignity mostly intact. On the walk home, Kiryu asks Keita directly whether he is still a virgin, and he confirms it. The two of them part on something resembling mutual understanding. Ako and Riko appear at that exact moment with questions, while that night, both Keita and Kiryu end up lying in separate beds thinking about each other. With their parents away on a neighborhood trip, Riko heads out for monitor supervision and pulls Keita aside before leaving. She tells him to call immediately if Ako does anything suspicious. Ako waves her off and tells Keita plainly that tonight it will be just the two of them. They spend the morning doing homework, then make a run to the store for ice cream to break through the heat. On the walk back, Ako grabs Keita's arm after pretending to trip and frames it as a small date. He hesitates for a moment before deciding to let it go. Back home with ice cream and cola, the studying does not get very far. Ako jokes that if he needs sodium, he can lick it off her skin, and Keita goes along with it further than either of them expected. He eventually kisses her before the doorbell interrupts everything. That evening, he sits with the watermelon feeling genuinely guilty about how far things went, while Ako soaks in the bath, having made a private decision that tonight is the night she crosses a line. She comes to him later, under the pretense of sharing watermelon, and teases him again about the salt. He pushes her onto the floor and starts from the beginning, explaining that she washed away everything about her that had gotten to him earlier in the day. Things escalate quickly until Riko bursts through the door, having left supervision early on instinct. She finds blood from Ako's nosebleed and misreads the scene entirely. Ako reassures her that she arrived just in time, and Riko demands physical proof. A fight breaks out, and Ako is left alone on the bed after two separate interruptions in one day. Riko shows up in Keita's room later that night, and forces a full confession out of him. She responds by making sure whatever happened with Eiko also happens with her. The next morning, Keita informs them he has early track practice, and on the walkout he quietly tells Riko that whatever he does with Eiko he will always do with her too. With the home bath out of order, Keita heads to Ume Bath on his own, having turned down Eiko's invitation to go together, while Eiko and Riko make their way there separately. By coincidence, Mikazuki and Kiryu are also headed to the same place after their own bath broke down. When Mikuni spots Akko and Riko outside, she tries to quietly leave before being pulled back in by Riko, and the whole group ends up going in together. Inside, the girls are genuinely impressed by the remodeled space and spread out across the different baths, while Keita, already inside and hiding behind a decorative stone, slowly realizes he may have walked into the wrong section entirely. On the girls' side, conversation drifts toward body comparisons in the way it tends to among a group of women undressing together. Kiryu gets singled out for her figure before retreating into the bath. Akko and Riko follow and immediately start teasing her and pull her towel away before triggering the jacuzzi. A full-on chase around the bathing area breaks out with Mikuni as the next target. She slips and falls and exposes herself entirely. When Akko and Riko pivot to comforting her, the conversation takes a turn that accidentally digs at Kiryu's insecurities instead, which prompts a genuine apology from everyone. Meanwhile, Keita is inching his way toward an exit when Mikuni slips outside to use the bushes, and the two of them collide in the dark. The splash from them falling into the water brings every girl running, and the situation fully unravels when Mikazuki reaches underwater and grabs something that should not be there. Keita is forced to surface and face the group, and Kiryu delivers an extended scolding. The whole thing ends with everyone told to get dressed and go home, while Keita's honest comment about chest size earns him tears from both sisters at once. Keita spends an entire night running through increasingly vivid imaginations, involving Kiryu and Mikazuki and Mikuni in sequence, and wakes up looking so worn out that Akko and Riko immediately notice something is off. Akko decides to handle it through food and puts together a dinner built entirely around Keita's favorite flavor. She quietly frames the whole thing as a way to leave a lasting impression on him, while Riko sits across the table, feeling increasingly competitive about the whole approach. After dinner, Akko introduces a game she calls Tapioca Mouth to Mouth, using their father's tapioca juice as the prop. The goal is to pass seeds back and forth through kisses without dropping or swallowing them. Riko pushes to make the rules more physical, and Keita unexpectedly raises the stakes further by suggesting a 3-seed variation. What starts as a light evening activity turns into a session that runs well into the night. When Riko eventually passes out, Akko discovers the juice had alcohol in it and cuts Keita off before he can ask for more. She then redirects the rest of the evening in a way that leaves her needing a moment alone in the bathroom to collect herself. She returns to find Keita still awake enough to admit to her shock that he actually remembers everything that happened between them at the hot spring after the entrance exam. Akko is furious. Riko wakes up and forces Akko to drink more juice until she passes out, then takes her own turn with Keita. The night ends in a way that leaves him too foggy the next morning to piece together any of it clearly. His father, brushing teeth beside him, tells him that if he cannot remember it, then it probably was not worth remembering. Keita laughs and agrees, then steps outside to head to school and gets a kiss on each cheek from Akko and Riko. The three of them walk off together while Keita wonders aloud whether moving on from his sisters will make other boys sad, and both sisters tell him he has a few things to take care of first.